possible without all of them. And so today, or in this case study, we're going to be looking at headwater wetlands. Excuse me. And this work started with the Powell Center Working Group, focused on wetland connectivity, during the WOTUS era. And then it went on to Margaret Palmer's lab at the University of Maryland. And then most recently, for those of you who are on Twitter, we have some, thank you so much. We have the a project that we dubbed the Delmarva Disco. So if you see hashtag Delmarva Disco, that group in the bottom right-hand corner is who that's referring to. Okay, so why do we care about wetlands? I grew up in Arkansas. Ducks reign supreme there. I have an uncle who, before he died, he was a duck hunting guide. That's how he made a living. They're incredible biodiversity resources. This is a reticulated flatwood salamander picture taken in South Alabama. These are really important places for species that we don't find anywhere else. Or also, for a lot of folks in this room, wetlands are some of the best BMPs for nutrient removal in agricultural landscapes. On a per area basis, you don't get more bang for your buck than a wetland. And finally, for those of you who care about carbon cycling, wetlands are oftentimes huge sinks of carbon. Although, as we'll talk about in a little bit, they're also a big source of carbon, and that's a huge gap in our knowledge of global carbon cycling. And while wetlands do all these great things, we've lost a ton of them. When I look at places I've lived in the past, Arkansas, we've lost almost 75% of our wetlands. In Missouri, almost 90%. Here in Kansas, y'all are doing a little bit better, right? At 50%. But regardless, we've lost a ton of our wetlands. And so, that in of itself, for me at least, makes the argument that maybe we should work to protect these and maybe enhance these functions more. And so the questions we're going to ask today is, how do inundation regimes vary across headwater wetland archetypes? This is the first question. What you'll notice is down the left-hand side of the screen, those same hierarchical drivers, they'll be highlighted as we go through those, and that'll be throughout the presentation. So if you get lost, just look to your left, and hopefully that will help you reorient. All right. And so when we talk about headwater wetland archetypes, for today, I'm going to talk about the prairie potholes, or prairie pothole wetlands, so wetlands that are in North and South Dakota. They're really important for duck habitat. Delmarva and Carolina Bays. These are really near and dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of my life standing waist deep in these wetlands. And if you go online, Carolina Bays, just Google Carolina Bay, and they make these really cool patterns on the landscape. They have very strict orientation. And there's been a lot of really interesting theories as to why they are that way. And then finally, cypress domes in South Florida. These are really cool landscapes. They have dwarf cypress trees. You kind of feel like you're in the Shire, so to speak, when you go in these. And to interrogate what the shapes of their hydrographs look like, we developed a simple bucket model to look at hydrologic drivers. This model, I don't want to go into too much detail, but essentially there's two buckets, and we're just shifting water between the wetland and its surrounding upland in these buckets. And so when I show you these plots, these plots are kind of unintuitive. On the y-axis is water level. On the x-axis is Julian day. But what's unintuitive about this plot is, since I'm in modeling space, you can do anything, right? So we ran the model for 1,000 years, and then this line represents the average of that 1,000 years, right? So on January 1st, that's the average water level from that 1,000 years. And then we parameterize this model space using publicly available data, mostly the National Wetland Inventory, and we print and some other data sets for each region. So we ran roughly 1,000 wetlands for each region for 1,000 years. So there's a lot of data condensed into these next plots. So get ready. You guys ready? Everybody crashing from the sugar high. Okay. So what you see at the top is a prairie pothole. You have this bump sometime in the spring. That's actually the spring freshetta, where the snow melts. And so that's absolutely what happens in those regions. You have essentially this one dump of water, and then the wetlands fill up, and then they drain for the rest of the year. If you don't get that snow, the wetlands don't fill up, and that's actually a big problem, and a continuing to be a problem in that region. In the Delmarva Bays, where I've spent so much time, we see a drawdown where the wetlands go dry in the late summer and early fall, and that's absolutely what those systems do. And then finally, in South Florida, you see the similar drawdown, but it happens much earlier, not because Florida is weird, although it is a weird place. It's mostly because it's hotter there earlier. So you have very different patterns, and those patterns are why we have different biota, even though that they're, along the same coast. And so we wanted to ask with this model, what are the potential physiographic drivers of this hydrologic variability? Now, when I was doing this work, it was during the first, or maybe the second, depending on how you count it, the second round of WOTUS. So we were really concerned about how these wetlands impact downstream waters. So the first step is, well, how much water moves from the wetland to downstream areas? So this was our attempt to characterize that. And so we did a sensitivity analysis. And what you'll see on this plot is on the y-axis is a relative sensitivity number, and on the x-axis are the different model parameters, and there'll be bar plots. And what you need to know here is that essentially the higher the bar, the more sensitive that parameter was. And for this case, we are looking at surface water fluxes, and this is for policy reasons. This is what policymakers care about. How long is that wetland connected to downstream waters? And so, as it turns out, the saturated conductivity of the soil and the watershed area draining to that wetland end up being very important, at least in our model space. And now I want to be cautious here. Models are, in my opinion, they're informed hypotheses of reality. So I don't think I would take my engineering stamp and stamp this. But it does give us an indicator of what types of things are driving fluxes. Since we had this great modeling space, we also wanted to think about things that we have a hard time measuring. So specifically, groundwater flux out of these small catchments. What we found here, which isn't going to be surprising to the hydrogeologist in the room, the depth to confining layer was a really important driver of these groundwater fluxes. And then finally, what I was most excited about was the surface water groundwater exchange, the lateral fluxes between the wetlands. That was a lot more complicated, and lots of important nonlinear interactions that we weren't able to characterize in the sensitivity analysis. So we have this modeling space where we played with, where we were able to play with different variables, but that's, again, just an informed hypothesis. We actually went to the local scale and on the Delmarva Peninsula, and we instrumented roughly 24 wetlands across 6 headwater catchments. And when I use the term catchment here, I'm working in a much smaller catchment than most folks are used to. These are on the order of 20 to 50 hectares, so much smaller. So in some cases, these wetlands make up most of the catchments. And in fact, we had to do some fancy things to even delineate these catchments even with high resolution LiDAR. But this is what my wetlands look like. You might think they're ugly. I think they're beautiful, but they do go dry every year. And that's really important. That's a really important component of their biogeochemistry. This is we took one water year's worth of data, and so this is what the water level in that wetland looks like. And so essentially, you have 3 seasons. You have in the fall, you have re-wetting. Once the leaves fall off the trees, they're no longer pulling water out of the superficial aquifer. So you have this re-wetting period. In the winter and early spring, the wetlands are full and they're actually spilling to downstream waters. And then you have a dry down. And occasionally we get hurricanes, and that's what that bump right there was. But that's kind of the general trend that we see across most years, although in Maryland, there's no such thing as an average year. So sometimes there's variation. But to quickly look at these drivers of hydrologic variability, we found, similar to our modeling space, depth to confining layer ended up being an important driver, specifically for mean water level in the wetlands. So we found that that we used elevation in this case because our wetlands were all close together, and we assumed that their depth to the confining layer, or at least to depth to where the permanent water table was roughly consistent. We found that elevation tracked well with that. Similarly, we found that wetland size was an important player in this water level variation. What's important here, so this little wetland right here, we call that Nate's Bay after me because I'm a little guy. So yeah, that was Nate's Bay. And then next to it is my favorite wetland of all time. And this was this beautiful, large, quintessential, it's just a beautiful place. And it's 5 hectares versus this little guy who was less than a hectare. But what you see is the little guy, he had much more variable water level, and the larger wetland had much more stable water level. And the important part, the reason I show these two is because they're both at the same elevation, right? So you would expect them to even have some like memory between the two, or some communication, but really the variations were pretty wildly different. And when we look at that across our 24 wetlands, we see that this is one of the strongest correlations in our data set, that as you increase wetland area, you decrease that water level variability, which if you're thinking about carbon and nitrogen fluxes, that variability drives a lot of those. So that's quite important, and it's actually bared out in some of our biogeochemistry studies as well. And finally, we looked at storage capacity. So how much water can that wetland hold? And again, we did some fancy topographic analyses to do this. I would love to explain this in greater detail, but if I did, you guys would all leave, or a lot of folks would leave. So if you want to know about this, I'll talk about it afterwards. But what we found is this watershed storage capacity correlated well with the recession rate in the wetland. Okay, I've realized that I'm one of the few individuals that loves thinking about where water moves on the landscape. But the reason why most hydrologists are interdisciplinary scientists is because most other scientists just want to know what the water is doing to their study thing. So in this case, the project was funded for carbon. And so we wanted to look at how this wetland variability impacted methane emissions in particular. And so across our wetlands, we instrumented this gradient from the wetland to the upland. And we've done all sorts of things. And today I'm just going to talk about the methane results. And in particular, the PhD student, Kelly Hondula, who's now she's a research scientist at Arizona. She went out seasonally, and really we didn't find much of a relationship. And this is pretty common in the wetland literature. Methane emissions are hard to predict. But what we did find is that if you look over here on the right, when water level is above 0, that's the x-axis. That's where we saw the most, where we saw positive emissions, is when there was inundation. So Kelly, she's an incredibly smart scientist. There's a ton of fun to work with her. She wanted to scale this up, and what do these methane emissions mean? So she took a watershed approach, and we identified all the potential wetlands in that watershed. And then she used a deep learning algorithm to try to track inundation using planet imagery across those wetlands. I don't have time to talk about this today, but this is a really big effort. And as you can see on this plot, it didn't quite work. And so this is the wetland area that we measured in black. And then the red bar is what Kelly modeled. And so what you're seeing is we're missing the shoulder season here. And this is actually closer than most folks have gotten thus far. So these little wetlands, they're just really difficult to see with remote sensing. And so Kelly got closer than other folks, so we're able to publish it, but there's still huge advances to be made in this area. But what I want y'all to remember, if you only remember one thing from this presentation, when she then did a scaling exercise and looked at, well, what happens to our wetland estimates if we look at only certain size wetlands? So as you move to the from left to right, you're decreasing the number of wetlands that are in that scaling estimate. On the y-axis is the methane emissions. The big take home here is if you don't account for the small wetlands, you're missing a ton of your methane. And there's a lot more to this story, and we could spend a lot of time talking about this. But in places like the prairie pothole regions, Maryland or South Florida, places that I call wetlandscapes, you have to account for these small wetlands, and they're the hardest to model, they're the most variable, and you can't see them through the trees. So this is a big challenge. And if we need to understand the methane emissions from these places, this is something that it's a pretty big open question. Okay. So you might be asking, well, Nate, that's all fine, but this is an academic exercise. You said you were going to talk about management. Well, so my background's actually in restoration. And as it turns out in this area, it's pretty easy, air quotes, to restore the hydrology of these wetland systems, not the biogeochemistry or the biology of the systems, but to restore the hydrology, they were ditched. That's how they were drained. So we can plug the ditches and restore the hydrology. And so that's largely what the Delmarva Disco team is doing. We have 3 amazing students working with us, and I don't want to dive too much into the results, but there's a lot going on. And a lot of cool work that's coming out. Actually, Katie Wadinsky, she just published her first chapter of her dissertation a couple of weeks ago. And so, yeah, be on the lookout, especially if you're on Twitter. We'll be blasting these out over the next few years. Okay, on to what most of you guys know about here is non-perennial streams. Amy told me that 80% of the streams in y'all state are non-perennial. That's wild. I live in Alabama where we're just like bleeding water. So it's pretty wild to me that, most of your streams go dry. So I don't have to spend too much time introducing these systems to you guys. Obviously, they're just systems that go dry on a regular basis. This is in Northeast Alabama. Alabama actually has mountains. A lot of folks don't know that. It's a beautiful place. You should come visit. But the 2 teams that I've worked with most here are the Dry Rivers RCN, and you'll notice a couple folks in this picture that are KU. So Amy's in there, and Sam is in there somewhere as well. And out of the Dry Rivers RCN, when we were all together, we actually kind of sparked the ideas for what eventually became the Ames proposal. And I see a lot of Ames faces in the room. And so, yeah, the work that I'm presenting here is mostly a result of these 2 very large and exciting and fun teams. And so majority of our stream network goes dry. This is something that shocked me, even as someone who studies systems that go dry. Had no idea that over 60% of the global stream length goes dry. And even in Alabama, again, the wettest place I've ever lived, we got over 64 inches of rain this year. We still had streams go dry. It's just amazing. And that drying, it has implications for the biology and the ecology. And so that's really the motivation behind this work, is to understand how this drying impacts downstream waters. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is look at how these drying regimes vary across CONUS. And to do this, and Sam, who's on the line, he's been a big part of this work, but we used a subset of the USGS gauge network where the streams went dry regularly. And we looked at the proportion of those gauges that went dry over the course of a year. And what you can see, so down here in the right-hand corner, this is the Eastern Forest one. Not many of those gauges went dry, but when they did go dry, it was mostly at the end of the water year in September and October. To contrast that with perhaps the Mediterranean climate, you see a much larger drying signal here. John Hammond led this really great study, and again, there's a lot of us in the room that helped co-author this study, looking at spatial patterns of stream drying. And specifically, he found that yes, there absolutely are spatial patterns that we see, and specifically at the annual scale. And one of the really interesting components to this is that when we looked at the potential drivers of this drying, really the ones that popped out most were here, the climatic drivers. These are what we found in the study as being a large part of that variability. Sam also did a follow-up study. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm sure you guys have heard this, but this study actually looked at temporal trends, and in places like Alabama, we're actually expecting, more drying over time. And so what are the potential drivers of these non-perennial flow regimes? And so another study using the same data set, but specifically looking at the event scale, Adam Price quantified, he looked at different metrics of individual events. Specifically, he thought about the drying rate, the duration of the event, both the dry down duration and the no flow duration. And then when the timing and duration, and the timing and magnitude of that event as well. I want to dive too deep into the details here, but we did a cluster analysis and kind of clustered. We had 25,000 events and we clustered them into different groups. And importantly, what I think was so interesting about this is then we looked at the variable importance of what drove that classification. What we found is it's largely these land use variables. And at this scale, when you're thinking about land use across CONUS, it's hard to say that land use is actually the driver. It might be really, what's the difference between a landscape with a lot of wetlands and a landscape with a lot of forest. And so to us, this really pointed to, when we're thinking about annual scale variation, climate is the driver that we should think about. But when we're thinking about these event scales, it's more the physiographic drivers, the local scale inputs that are driving that variation. And so thinking about some of those local scale drivers, we wanted to zoom into Alabama, and specifically, this is work my PhD student, Delaney Peterson, and Corianne Tattery, a postdoc in my department, have been leading. They're both on the line, and I'm probably going to butcher their work, so I apologize in advance. But we are here in the coastal plain of Alabama. We're in a transitional area between Appalachia and the coastal plain called the Fall Line Hills. So we have coastal plain geology, but we actually have topography, which it makes for a lot of fun hydrology. And specifically, Delaney's taken hydrologic connectivity and deconstructed it into vertical, horizontal, and longitudinal connectivity, kind of like a vector, if you guys remember from physics. And importantly, what I want to focus on today are the different units that we find in our watershed. And these probably aren't too different than some of the things that you guys see in your headwater streams. We have these really deeply incised reaches, sometimes as much as 3 meters deep. And we're talking about streams you can step across. And then when there's a slope break, we have these crazy animistosing wetland complexes that form at the base. And there's just a ton of really cool stuff happening there. And then usually the stream comes back to some sort of equilibrium. And then we go through that process again. So this is pretty regular until you get into more of the bottomland hardwood forest area. And so Delaney, one of the big portions of this chapter, she's trying to characterize the horizontal fluxes of water in these areas. So these are 3 cross sections that we took of a gully, a typical and a wetland transect. So a transect, taking a slice of the stream from one side to the other. And we installed hill slope wells looking at water level. And so this is the average water level in her gully transect. And what you see is when you go from the riparian well, so this well right here, to the stream, that almost for the entire year, the water is going from that hill slope into the stream. But you might expect that in Alabama, but wait. When we were in the typical, we actually found that the stream was actually contributing to that riparian area, which was really shocking to us because we just thought, hey, it's Alabama. There's so much water that we're just always flushing downstream, but that's not the case. The stream's actually supporting that riparian area. And then finally in the wetland, we see that basically that you're at an equilibrium there, and that's mostly because the well was basically what we call the wetland. And when we look at the variability, so this plot on the x-axis is the date, and then the y-axis is the change from the beam. We see that the gully has the most variability, and so each one of these lines is one of the different wells, and it doesn't really matter which well is which in this. For what I'm trying to get across here, the point is there's just a ton of variability. Similarly, or not similarly, in contrast, when we look at the typical, we see a pretty consistent variation across those wells. And then when we get to the wetland, this was somewhat shocking that we saw more variability there, but the stream is more constant in the wetland. And so that stream is buffering the wetland water level, which is actually really important, again, for these biogeochemical cycling. I hesitated to show this. I'm not a geophysicist. I collaborated with, or Delaney collaborated with the geophysicist in our geology department. And then they did ERT. And so if anybody wants to help walk me through this afterwards, I would love to talk about this because I still don't quite understand what's going on. But our interpretation of this, so this is the wetland the wetland transect is where we did this ERT. And our y-axis, you'll note, is much smaller than what you guys are used to working at. But our interpretation of this is that we have very different, you saw very different resistivity at the edge of the hill slope. And that's also where we find a lot of our wetlands. And so anecdotally, when we have water isotopes and also looking at the conductivity of the water, we see that we have wells in both of these locations, both the yellow area and the blue area. Those waters have different chemical signatures as well. And so we think that this suggests that this blue area is actually an area of upwelling. And so finally, I'm not going to talk about the ecosystem functions, but we are starting a new project specifically looking at those hill slope wetlands. I think Amy called them hillside wetlands in a publication, maybe, I don't know. And then comparing them to floodplain wetlands and how the sourcing of water impacts carbon and nitrogen processing. I'm really, really excited about that. And at least a couple of folks in the room work with Corey and Tattery. She led the effort in that proposal. Okay. And so now let's move on to floodplains. So flooding and floodplains, I kind of divide this world into two places. We often think about flooding as bad, right? I'm a new homeowner and I don't want my home to flood. So I agree. Flood hazards can be bad, but flooding also plays a really important role in structuring our ecosystems. And so my group does do some flooding hazard work, specifically looking at private wells and superficial aquifers. And I'm looking for a student for this project. So if you know anyone who wants to do drinking water work and wants to work in superficial aquifers, send them my way. But what we're going to talk about today is the function that floods play. And in Alabama, we have these really special floodplain forests known as bottomland hardwood forests. This is where a ton of our biodiversity comes from. It's also, I grew up duck hunting in bottomland hardwood forests, so they're really special culturally to me. You might have seen cypress trees. They're the ones with the big knees. They're kind of a hallmark of the Southeast. And so just like the other parts of this presentation, we wanted to know, how does floodplain inundation vary across CONUS? And similar to the previous plots, we can look at how flooding varies seasonally. Importantly, this isn't just timing. This is the proportion of flux into the floodplain. We developed a method to look at this based on the stage discharge hydrograph, or the stage discharge relationship. And I'd love to talk to people about that if they're interested. But what you can see, just like we were looking before, different regions have different timing of this floodplain connectivity. We're in the Missouri, or the Missouri River Basin is an important driver out here. And so it has a very different seasonal signal than maybe the Southeast. One of the physiographic drivers that is really important for floodplains is where they fall on the stream order scale. So stream order, first order streams a really small stream, perhaps in most of the country that stream might go dry. And then as you move up, streams get bigger. And so we see some pretty striking patterns in this. You see that event frequency, so the number of storm events, they decrease as you move upstream. Anyone who's lived along a big river, as you guys do, you know that that river probably doesn't rise or flood every time it rains. But if you live near a small stream, that small stream might jump out of bank every time it rains, especially if you live in an urban area. On the flip side, though, when we look at the volume of that flood water moving into the floodplain, it's much, much greater as you move downstream. And so what I really want to talk about with the last little bit of our time is how do these inundation regimes impact ecosystem function? And specifically thinking about my recent master's student, Matt Shockey's project, we were looking at how hydrologic connectivity and specifically floodplain storage impact tree ecosystem function in a minor, this is a minor bottom stream, so it's like an 8th order floodplain. So it's not the Mississippi River, but it's still a large swamp complex is what a lot of folks would call it. And what's really cool about this is 20 minutes from my house. I've never had a field site so close to home. Sometimes I go walk my dog out there. In fact, it's awesome. And so to briefly look at the inundation dynamics of this site, the left is our hydrograph, the kind of sherbet orange we have 92 years of flow data. So that's kind of the average hydrograph that you would expect. The blue hydrograph is what we experienced the year we did our study. So of course, we started a study on one of the wettest years of record, and Matt had to get out to the sites to measure trees. And so on the right, we estimated inundation area using a really simple inundation model. You can see there's from July to August, there's really only like one little period there that there was an inundation. So the only time he had to do his thesis work. So we were really sweating it out there, but he got it done. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about floodplain hydrology today, although I would love to talk about it afterwards until I'm excited about a lot of these things. But we did try to characterize surface water, groundwater connectivity between our sloughs and the surrounding floodplain surface. And so what you can see is the floodplain could be, or the slough could be a source to that floodplain aquifer where water's sitting and just slowly bleeding out. Could also have a flow through situation, or the floodplain could, or the slough could be a sink. So the aquifer could be contributing water to that. What I want to point out here is that as we move from an area that's rarely inundated to areas that are more inundated, and maybe you would expect this, that those areas become largely, they're sinks. So they spend a lot of time flushing water out, which we think that has big implications for dissolved organic matter transport. But Matt was studying tree species distributions, and he used this metric called HAND. It's the height above nearest drainage. Essentially, we just deleted the valley slope, the DEM. And then this HAND metric told us how high we were above the bankful line. So if you have a HAND of 0, your tree was at the elevation of bankful. If you have a HAND of 1 meter, you're 1 meter above bankful. And if you're a HAND of 2 meters, you're 2 meters above bankful, or at least that's what the estimate was supposed to help us with. And when we look at our wetland indicator status of the trees, it's very much like you would expect. As you increase HAND, so as you go from left to right, you're walking uphill out of the floodplain, you decrease your obligate wetland species. And similarly, as you walk uphill, this lightest color here, you increase your facultative upland species. So species that you wouldn't expect to see in a wetland. Well, we didn't see them in the wetland. But that wasn't the point of the study. Here we were really trying to understand what was partitioning where the species were located. And so we did a multivariate analysis where we actually modeled the individual trees. So for each plot, what species are going to be there. This is called a mini GLM. And the model actually did pretty well. For most species, we were within 2 or 3 stems per plot, although the species that were most common, we did find higher variability there. But once we were able to predict species based on HAND, we then used a trait database, and we're actually starting to predict tree function. And I'm so excited about this because so much of our restoration projects are quantitative or qualitative. Our designs are based on qualitative assessments. And I think that this tool could be used as a quantitative assessment, and more specifically push us towards doing functional restoration instead of doing restoration based on form. And so with that, I've had this conceptual model that I've dragged you guys through all this entire seminar. But of course, this actually isn't hierarchical. we live in complex systems, so there's these complex feedbacks between these levels of hierarchy. And I'm not quite sure how those feedbacks, I haven't figured out how those work, but more importantly, how do we use this information to manage our systems, and more specifically thinking about using the correct tool for the correct situation. And the thing that I think about most is stream restoration. We have a lot of stream restoration projects in Alabama. They do a great job at stabilizing a stream bank, but maybe they're not implemented at the correct scale to solve our nutrient problems. And so, yeah, I've got a lot of thought to do about this and build on that, but that's where my group is headed over the next few years. And yeah, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come to the talk.
We got some time for questions. If anybody has any. Sam, do you want to handle the online portion?
Yeah, sure. If anyone puts one in the chat, or just unmute yourself online.
All right. Any questions?
So I'm very interested in the last few slides, sort of on the application side, Nate. So can you say a little bit more about how the application kind of walk us through a little bit of the process of, okay, so we've modeled using hands analysis, we've modeled what is it where specific trees should be planted, and therefore we're going to go plant there and restore there, or how would it actually work?
So that's a great question. So I'm going to repeat so that folks online can hear it. So essentially the question was how do we implement this hand modeling? And so, yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not a big fan of the reference reach approach where you design to a specific reach of river. So we have more work to do. This was all done on startup. So we need to expand it and do it at other sites, both sites that experience different inundation regimes, but also sites that have different that have different land use histories. But essentially, I think this could be useful for guidance for where to plant different species. And then also, as we're planning for changes in our flow regime, especially in Alabama, we're going to go from, having pretty regular rain events to having less and more drought. Maybe this will help us think about how to deal with that in our plantings. And that's kind of like an envelope of where we can plant plants. The other thing about hands that I failed to mention is we have hand for every floodplain in the US through the National Water Model. So it's this, I don't think our study's the golden ticket right now, but I think that approach could be a really useful approach to especially bottomland hardwood restoration.
Yeah. So Mary Hill has a question online. Mary, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. This was a great talk. I really appreciated it. Let's see, I wanted to ask, you talked about methane releases and how small wetlands were really produced the dominant amount. And I was just curious if you could put the methane release into some kind of context.
So that's a wonderful question. Off the top of my head, I can't put the methane release into the context of the entire budget. But what I will say is the state of Maryland wanted to do a carbon budget, which, that's kind of crazy for an entire state, but they couldn't close that budget. And it was, I can't remember the order of magnitude of the percent, but it was 10 to 30% ish. And we believe a lot of that had to do with our wetlands. I can't give you the number on what the small wetlands contributed to that, though. That's a really good question. And I can get back to you on that, though.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I'd love that, but you have lots to do. So thank you for the answer.
Any other questions in the room?
I'm also intrigued by the difference between the baby wetlands and the large wetlands in Delmarva. So I'm just wondering if there's something fundamentally different about the sediment in the baby wetlands. Are they sandy? And then in the large ones, is that mostly peat? And then really what is controlling this kind of transition between the two?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. And we could talk for a long time about the differences. I will say that surface area to, or the shoreline length increases exponentially as you make those smaller wetlands, because the shoreline length to area ratio just, it explodes. So you have a lot more reactive interfaces. The wetlands are also fundamentally different. They're both mineral soil wetlands. I've never worked in, right, I've worked very little in peat wetlands, those soils scare me, but they are fundamentally different. And one of the big things though is also that hydrologic variability. Those little wetlands, they just, they don't have the capacity to buffer changes in the water, the surrounding water level.
Can you repeat the question real quick for people?
Oh, the question is why did the small wetlands in Delmarva, why were they so different than the large wetlands? The other thing about those small wetlands is they're the ones, that are preferentially turned into roads and buildings and farms as well.
We have another question online. We're just gonna rotate between in the room and online. David Dunnigan, I hope I pronounced that right. Want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Enjoyed the talk. Just quick thing, your chat is not accepting anything. It says chat's disabled. I was hoping you might be able to put a few things in the chat. You referenced a lot of very interesting papers, and it was just too much to track. So kind of hoping you might be able to share that a little bit. And then the other thing was, I can appreciate the physical aspects of this, but I'm very interested in the biological aspects. So when we talk about the methane stories, somebody must be looking at the microbiology of that, and if you had a comment on it, it'd be nice.
Yeah, we did a whole, so I'm not a biologist, even though I sit in the biology department, but we did characterize the microbial community along the transect from the wetland to the upland. As you would expect, you saw more methane producing bacteria, or methane producers, not just bacteria. We had a lot of fungi too, as you moved towards the wetter zones. But we also saw a lot of methane oxidizers in the upland, which I guess for the microbiologist, that might not be surprising, but it was something that I'd never really thought of. There's other ongoing work looking at the difference between the microbiome of the restored. So this project's also part of a large USDA study where we have a wetland that was turned into an ag field, a restored wetland, and a natural wetland. And there's also work being done looking at the differences in the microbiomes there. Again, this might be unsurprising to the biologists in the room, but the microbiome of the restored wetland looks nothing like the one of the natural wetland.
And David, we're going to have Nate give us a list of the papers and send those out in an email to everybody. Don, I think you had your hand up a little while ago.
Yes. So how important is the variation in the transpiration of the plant species, such as phreatophytes, non-phreatophytes, in controlling the stream levels and the wetland levels?
So from a watershed scale, we did a Butico curve analysis, and we looked at year-to-year variation, and the timing of that of leaf on and leaf off is incredibly important for the hydro period. And in fact, one of the things that I was really excited about, but then I got a job and left, we never chased it, was we're increasing the duration of summer in Maryland. And so we're essentially pumping more water out of those wetlands faster. And so I think, one of the predictions or hypotheses is that as we increase that longer growing period, we're actually going to see more woody encroachment, and that, that will essentially, we'll have succession in those wetlands start occurring. As far as the small streams, that's a great question. My group hasn't addressed that, but I do think Logan might be looking at that over the next few years. So I maybe ask him in a bit, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely a big role.
We have time for a couple more questions. We got one online. Jess Wilhelm, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, sure. Thanks, Tom. I wrote my question down. This is kind of dovetailing that last question. I was just curious about vegetation in particular in the wetlands and how you, I don't know if like wetland scientists, if there's a particular way you're quantifying the role of those plants in controlling for the hydrologic variability you're seeing.
So Kelly and I cheated and we picked wetlands without plants in them because the woody vegetation really drives a lot of methane production that we weren't able to quantify with our simple methods. I do know that there is a lot of work in that lab that I left, the Palmer lab, where they're looking at the role of wetlands and CO2 and methane emissions, specifically trying to use landscape ecology approaches and define landscape patches within a single wetland and the dynamics of emissions that contribute to a flux tower. I don't, Jess, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'll look into, yeah, thank you.
Wait, you have one of them, and I finish up with Jay after you go.
The Cypress area, you didn't get a chance to talk much about it, but the little hammock that you showed, is that actually a depression, a wetland?
Yeah, so the cypress domes, they're really cool. They're also in a karst geology, and they're a really cool ecosystem. I unfortunately haven't had a chance to spend a lot of time in them or do a lot of work in them. The only work I've done is this modeling study. But the cypress domes, they function very similarly to these other depressional wetlands, with the caveat that there's karst, and karst makes all things hydrology difficult. Yeah.
But when you get down into the Everglades, the cypress are high ground typically.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to say it's in the west portion of the Everglades. I could be wrong about that though. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly where these sites were instrumented. And there's a lot of really great work, specifically out of Matt Cohen's lab, looking at their spatial distributions and potentially the calcium carbonate and horizontal exchange that drove that distribution. If you guys, it seems like a very geoscience thing that you guys would be interested in.
Jay?
Yeah, Nate, so I know that we're very close to our time, we're right at our time. You said that Florida was weird. And as perhaps the only Floridian in the room.
My wife's from Florida, so no, my wife's from Florida, and so I just superimposed her family. No, also I'm from
I'll say I disagree.
Well, yeah, I'm from Alabama right now, so I really I have no room to talk either. So apologies, I was making a joke.
Thanks, Dave. And one last thing, Logan has a gift from the geology department to give you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so Nate, in traditional colloquial fashion, the Department of Geology would like to present you this G-Hawker mug.
Oh, very
And we'd
cool.
like to just thank you for presenting your work and spending the past few weeks with us.
We've got tons of coffee and cookies to take, so feel free to grab on your way out.
I'm Jay Calvis. I'm the director of this.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you too.
Yeah, and I was checking.
Oh, it's hilarious. No, we're totally weird. Yeah, absolutely.